All right, so let's dive a little bit deeper into this Trey Hendrickson business. And real quick, just before we do, I have to say, I am so proud of the community that we've built here. I'm so proud of the way that people listening to this show, the way you guys engage in the comments section. And I know to say you're proud of someone, like for a parent or an elder to say, I'm proud of you, there's something about that that's complimentary. But when maybe someone like me says it, who might be younger than you or the same age or you view as an equal, there might be something about that that comes off as like condescending, but it's not. Like, I'm just saying how happy I am to see the way you guys engage in the comment section. Like, one of my biggest goals when I started this channel was to further the discussion around this team. It's like the vision of the show, to create a smarter, more objective Colts fan, to push the discussion further, as opposed to kind of just get caught up in the emotion and bug out and make claims without really anything to back it up. I'm one of these people that very much likes to take the deeper dive, and we have some really, really smart people in the comments section. I'm really grateful for the way that you guys contribute to what it is that we're doing over here. Shout out to Daniel Smalley. I hope that's how you pronounce your name. Great contributions in the comments section on the last episode, mentioning not only Trey Hendrickson's familiarity with Lou Anarumo from his time in Cincinnati, but also bringing up the fact that he was coached by Charlie Partridge at Florida Atlantic University, where he had 28 sacks over the course of 3 seasons being coached by Charlie. So that's got me thinking, okay, I mean, it's one thing to say, yeah, of course the Colts should trade for Trey Hendrickson. He'd improve their pass rush so much. Chris Ballard's got to go do that. He's got to keep his word to the fan base. Like, sure, that might not be the wrong take, but at the same time, just about anyone can say that. Like, you don't have to be a Colts fan to look at a guy who's had 17 and a half sacks in the past 2 seasons, rather back-to-back 17 and a half sack seasons in a row, and say, yeah, that would make a pass rush better. That would make any defense better. You don't really need to be a fan to come to that conclusion. But me and you, we are fans, right? So if we're going to talk about a Trey Hendrickson trade, why not take a little bit deeper of a dive? Like, will we come to the same conclusion as the people who aren't taking that deeper dive? Probably. I mean, I'm not saying it's not, but I am one of those people that cares very, very much about the details. Like, I love this type of thing because, again, it just gives us a little bit more context when we're saying these things, because one day we may have a situation that looks similar and we may be having an opportunity to trade for a great player. But just the fact that the player is great in of itself doesn't technically mean that it makes sense. So even if diving into the details isn't necessary in this case, the thought exercise may prove useful in the future. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? Because right now I kind of feel like I'm just yapping and yapping and yapping, and you're kind of just like, Justin, get into what the hell it is that you're trying to talk about. So there's still things that you're going to have to consider, right? To be as thorough as possible when having this discussion. For example, you want the Colts to trade for Trey Hendrickson, as we all do. But how much have you thought about the cost? Like, have you thought about how much it is that the Colts are going to have to give up to bring him in? And if you have, great. But how is it that you're coming to that conclusion? What are you doing? Like, are you looking at previous trades? Are you looking at something online? Are you simulating it in Madden? Like, how is it that you are looking and saying, this is what the Colts should be giving up for Trey Hendrickson? So that's one aspect of it. And sure, it makes sense for this upcoming season for the Colts to trade for Trey Hendrickson. But other than the on-field production for this upcoming season, how does it change the landscape for the Indianapolis Colts moving forward? Because when you make these types of moves as an organization, it's not only about the season in front of you, but you do have to think a little bit ahead, right? Like, it's not a Madden franchise. You can't just do whatever you want, and then one day you get to the end of it and say, damn, I really put myself into a pickle, and you quit and you go start a new one. It's not how it works, right? So we're going to talk about some of this stuff, but before we do, you know what it is. I got to introduce myself. My name is Justin. This right here is the Riding the Bench Colts podcast. As always, ask anyone watching and enjoying the show, go ahead, shoot it a like. It's going to help me get out to as many Colts fans as humanly possible. Of course, subscribe if you want to be a part of the journey. We're on our way to 4,000 subscribers over here on the YouTube channel. We're nowhere close, but we want to get there by the start of next season. So if you keep coming back, enjoying the content, or perhaps today's your first time here and you're enjoying what it is that you're listening to, Maybe you hit that subscribe button, but there's no pressure. It's okay. I'm going to be here for a very, very, very long time. So if you don't do it today, trust me, you will have plenty of other chances. Of course, audio listeners, leave a 5-star, 5-star, 5-star. Do we know the reference that I'm making right there? Audio listeners can't see what I'm doing. Video people, 5-star, 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 WWE. That's your hint. Okay, leave a 5-star review. Let the people know how much it is that you're enjoying the content, but most importantly, be civil in the comments section. Let's contribute to the discussion, just like my boy Daniel Smalley. And then we go on back to the regularly scheduled program. Okay, so there are 3 things, in my opinion, that we need to cover to make sure we truly understand the prospect of this trade in its entirety. Like, I'm hoping that right here I'll cover most of everything that we need to know about Trey Hendrickson and the possibility of the Colts bringing him in. One, as I mentioned, what is it going to cost? What is the collateral that we need to give to the Cincinnati Bengals to bring him in? How are we going to measure that? And then 2, what's the likelihood of it actually happening? Like, why should we think that Chris Ballard, who has been notoriously conservative in the offseason, why should we think that he is going to make a move of this magnitude? And then 3, sure, it makes sense now to bring him in, but his contract expires at the end of the upcoming season. Is it likely to be a 1-season rental for the Indianapolis Colts? Or is there a possibility for a 3 to 5 year stay? Like, is there a long-term fit here? Because make no mistake, without the potential of a long-term fit in Indianapolis, you can kiss the idea of this deal for Trey Hendrickson goodbye. So, for starters, let's try to figure out the cost, okay? Now, there may be a number of different ways to do this, and I'm not saying my way of doing it is the most accurate, but I am going to bring you through my thought process when I'm trying to do this. So, what I'm about to do is list some guys in the past 15 years or so that were either solid defensive linemen or high-level pass rushers going into the last year of their deal that were traded from one team to another team. And I think once I go through this, you're going to realize that we can probably get pretty close to what the potential asking price is for Trey Hendrickson without really having any inside information on the market and some of the offers that are being made for him as we speak, okay? So we're going to start with the most recent one, and then we're going to work our way back. So 2024, Hassan Reddick gets traded from the Philadelphia Eagles to the New York Jets for a conditional second-round pick following an 11-sack season at the age of 29 years old. 2023, Leonard Williams gets traded from the Giants to the Seahawks mid-season around the trade deadline with 2.5 sacks for a 2024 second-round pick and a 2025 fifth-round pick, 29 years of age. The year is 2020. A familiar name in Yannick Ngakoue gets traded from the Jacksonville Jaguars, that fucking sorry organization with the worst fans on planet Earth. Yannick Ngakoue gets traded from the Jaguars to the Vikings for a 2021 second-round pick and a conditional 2022 fifth-round pick at 25 years of age. And then a real flashback for those of you guys who have been watching football for a little bit longer, for some of the older folk, right? 2009, Richard Seymour, perhaps the most comparable to Trey Hendrickson from the caliber of player, right? He was a 5-time Pro Bowler at the time of being traded, gets traded from the Patriots to the Raiders following an 8-sack season for a 2011 first-round pick. Notice that's a 2009 trade, and the pick is a 2011 first-round pick, okay? So based on all of that, we can start to form an idea of exactly what it would take. So you look at Hassan Reddick, Leonard Williams, and Yannick Ngakoue. The common denominator within that is a second-round pick, and then Leonard Williams and Yannick Ngakoue also included a fifth-round pick. Richard Seymour, the only one of those guys that commanded a first-round pick. That being said, none of those guys had 17.5 sacks for 2 straight seasons, particularly in the league now where passing is so much more what an offense is predicated on as opposed to maybe 2009 when Richard Seymour was in the league, okay? The real big question for me, based off of that, is can you get Trey Hendrickson without giving up the 14th overall pick? Like, that's the tipping point right there. Not saying that if you have to give it up, you shouldn't. I'm just saying that's sort of the negotiating point. Do you have to give up the first round pick, or is a second and some other stuff okay, given that everyone knows that Trey Hendrickson is being traded? Like, the Bengals don't exactly have a whole ton of leverage from that standpoint. The only leverage they're going to have are kind of the offers that are coming in, but they don't have the leverage of saying, yeah, we're just going to keep Trey Hendrickson around. They've already been open about the fact that they're trading him. Like, we know this one's going to take at least a second rounder, but how much more is it going to take? Is a second rounder Samson Ebukam and somewhere from a third to fifth round pick either this year or next season? Is that enough? Like, is that enough to bring in Trey Hendrickson? Based on the history, based on what I just told you, that seems to be somewhere in the ballpark. Like, that may not be the exact value it takes, but it seems like you're coming in with an offer that, based off a historical precedent, is within reason. And for the Bengals, of course, I do think it makes sense. So if the Bengals were to say, okay, we're going to give you Trey Hendrickson, you're going to give us a second rounder, Samson Ebukam, and call it a fourth round pick, hell, call it a third round pick in 2026, okay? I think for the Bengals, that's not a bad deal, okay? Ebukam, like Hendrickson, has a contract expiring at the end of the 2025 season, one that projects to be cheaper when you talk about renewing. Now, we know he's coming off the injury, a very big injury. It's the Achilles with Ebukam, right? Not the ACL, it's the Achilles, even tougher, right? Okay? But that being said, that's a team that has not locked in Jamar Chase. They have not locked in T. Higgins to a long-term deal. So they do need the flexibility that perhaps comes with that expiring contract, and also that comes with the cheaper price point on that contract. In addition to that, they get a little bit of added production in return for a Trey Hendrickson. Like, it's not just one of these deals where you give up your absolute best pass rusher and you're left out to dry, because don't forget Sam Hubbard on the other side, and those two have been a tandem, a real good tandem for quite some time for Cincinnati. He just retired too. So they lose Trey Hendrickson, and you go from your two starting defensive ends for years now to not having either of those guys. And this isn't exactly a team that's in a full rebuild. Like, when you have the firepower that Cincinnati has, when you have Joe Burrow, oh, what a player he is, right? What a player. If only the Colts, neither here nor there, really not the point. Allow me to take a sip real quick of, you're going to see the brand. I don't have a sponsor. Someone give me a freaking sponsor. So hold on, audio listeners, a little blue raspberry, kind of like a off-brand Gatorade, I guess. Hold on. So, again, Bengals not in a full rebuild, okay? So the idea that you would want to have a little bit of production in return, and you're not just looking at draft capital and draft capital only when returning for Trey Hendrickson, that's something that makes sense. So that's my take on the practicality of the Colts pulling it off, right? And what it would cost. But the next thing is, well, why would Chris Ballard do it? Like, after all, the only unit that we have not really heard him allude to upgrading this offseason is the defensive line. But, and that's a very big but, like a Nicki Minaj type but, okay? If there's one thing that we know about Chris Ballard, it's that he's never satisfied with what he has in the trenches. From a football sense, his philosophy is you build from the inside out. Now, whether or not you agree, that's really not the point. I'm just talking about the likelihood of a Trey Hendrickson trade. He likes to make sure that you have 6, 7, 8 guys that could play on the defensive line and the offensive line. Last year's draft, a great example. Almost nobody expected the Colts to go pass rusher in round 1. And the overwhelming consensus when they drafted Laitu Latu was kind of a shock, right? Everyone was a little bit shocked. And speak of Laitu Latu, what a benefit it would be for him to have a guy like Trey Hendrickson around, okay? Because guys that can get you, let alone over 15 sacks, let alone 17 and a half, those types of guys don't grow on trees. So sure, the Colts right now have some studs on the defensive line in DeForest Buckner, in Grover Stewart, in Kwity Paye, in a Samson Ebukam who can still play, right? Obviously, that guy still brings value if you're talking about a little bit of mentorship. But in terms of pure dominant pass rushers, the Colts don't have anything like that. And the idea of having a Trey Hendrickson to show Laitu Latu the ropes is really a compelling idea on all fronts. Like, you want to talk about giving your first rounder the absolute best chance to succeed? Of course, he gets the mentorship. That's one side of it. But on the other side of it, the pressure for him to be that guy, the expectation that he has to be that guy that gets to the quarterback week in and week out immediately in his second season in a position that generally takes a little bit of time to develop, the idea that he has to immediately step into that role gets alleviated to some degree. Now, that can work a few different ways, right? Sometimes with a little bit less pressure, guys work a little bit less hard. But sometimes if you have a little bit less pressure, it's liberating on some level. So how it affects Laitu Latu, I don't know. But there's a case to be made that taking some of that pressure off of Laitu Latu is a positive, okay? And also, what's the biggest trade that Chris Ballard has made since being the general manager of the Indianapolis Colts? Now, sure, you can argue maybe it's Carson Wentz or Matt Ryan, but in terms of draft capital, remember, he gave the 14th overall pick for defensive lineman DeForest Buckner. Well, very interesting, because the Colts have the 14th overall pick right now. Kind of funny how that type of thing works. So you take all those things into account and couple it with the familiarity he has with Charlie Partridge, the familiarity he has with Smooth Lou Gabagoo, right? And I think you can look at it and say this is absolutely the type of trade that Chris Ballard would make. Now, finally, and most importantly, and kind of goes into the idea of whether or not Chris Ballard would make the trade, is there a potential long-term fit with Trey Hendrickson in Indianapolis? I think Trey himself would be interested, right? Between the coaches on staff and a team that takes pride in their defensive front, Cincinnati being pretty close to Indianapolis as well. For him, I think it would be a seamless transition. But for the Colts, would it be something that you look and say, well, okay, beyond this season, we can expect to keep him around? I think it looks pretty good on that front, too. Like I mentioned earlier, the idea of Ebicom being in the trade and the fact that just like Hendrickson, his contract is going to be expiring at the end of the 2025 season. Well, another guy that the Colts have on the defensive line whose contract is going to expire is Kwity Paye. So by making this trade and including Ebicom, which I know is not like part of it, right? I'm speculating there, okay? But if you were to do that, you're essentially parlaying Samson Ebicom and Kwity Paye into Trey Hendrickson, because the money you would have spent on those guys ultimately is going to Trey Hendrickson. And then the only other notable names you have expiring at the end of the 2025 season from a contract perspective at that point are going to be Alec Pierce, or is going to be Alec Pierce. Really, Alec Pierce, Kwity Paye, the two big guys. So the Colts aren't exactly tied down with loads of financial commitments near term. Now, the 2026 offseason, on the other hand, I mean, insane. Like, go ahead and look at that. Like, all of like our best players, right? Like I'm pretty sure Michael Pittman Jr., but if not him, I know Quentin Nelson, Jonathan Taylor, Matt Gay. Not that really counts as one of our best players. Point being, go look at the 2026 expiring contracts. That's a real deal offseason, okay? But the 2025, the one coming after the 2025 season, that not so bad. So much can change between now and that 2026, like that post 2026 offseason. Either way, let's not get too far away from the point. We're running real smooth right here. We're on a concise episode. The point is that, yes, of course the Colts should trade for Trey Hendrickson, but not only that, it makes a lot of sense for everybody involved. Not only the Colts, but Trey Hendrickson, the Bengals. So this right here, in conclusion, is a trade that I really hope the Colts do, because it almost feels like it's tailor-made for them. Like, at risk of setting an expectation that maybe is setting us up for failure, it's kind of like handed to the Colts on a silver platter to go get Trey Hendrickson. So we're going to see how they execute that. But there it is. You just made it to the end of the episode. Congratulations. Like, subscribe if you've not yet. My name is Justin. This right here was the Riding the Bench Colts podcast and is the Riding the Bench Colts podcast. It's not like something has changed from the start of the episode to now. And as always, go Colts.